book of Habakkuk, or is it Habakkuk? Well, it really doesn't matter. The Hebrew name is Habakkuk, C-H, Habakkuk. Most of the names, in fact, of our books sound quite different in original Hebrew than English. Jeremiah is Yirmayahu, and Isaiah is Yeshayahu. So, again, how we pronounce them in English, a lot of the king's names, in fact, when we hear them in Hebrew, they're quite different. The story of Habakkuk is just the sense of, the word why is often the single title or the subject, as it were, the summary of Habakkuk by a lot of commentators. The prophet is appealing to Yahweh. It's really not a prophecy of any event to come, as much as looking at the events which are about to unfold in Judah and asking God, how can this be? So let's talk about that. The year is about 612, we think. This is just a couple of years before these three deportations, where Babylon will come over to Jerusalem, destroy the temple ultimately, but over the course of 605, 597, and 586, completely wipe out the southern kingdom. And Habakkuk is standing at the precipice of this moment, it seems, before it actually happens, and asking the general question, how can you allow this, God? How can you have, well, let's read actually the text. Chapter 1, verses 2 and 3. O Lord, how long shall I cry, and you will not hear? Even cry out to you, violence, and you will not save. Why do you show me iniquity and cause me to see trouble? For plundering and violence are before me. There is strife and contention arises. Verse 6, for indeed I, God speaking then to Habakkuk, for I am raising up the Chaldeans, a bitter and hasty nation which marches through the breadth of the earth to possess dwelling places that are not theirs. The point is that God is taking a nation that is clearly given to the worship of other gods, and not Yahweh, and using them, of all things, to punish Israel, which at least in their history has had connection to Yahweh. In other words, it's really an argument of, God, how can you allow a worse people than us to punish your people? As bad as we are, how could you use someone who's even worse than us? 1:13, Habakkuk says, you are of purer eyes than to behold evil, and cannot look on wickedness. Well, that must be a rhetorical statement, because the next line admits that that's exactly what he does. Why do you look on those who deal treacherously? The tongue-in-cheek statement is, God, you hate looking at evil things, but you certainly are, because you're taking someone who's quite evil. They are the most evil nation of the world at this point in the eyes of Jews, and they are the ones to bring punishment. So this is really a book that centers on the problem of evil in the Old Testament. We've talked about it before. Job, at the outset, frankly, of the Old Testament, gets into it too. But this is a specific version of the problem of evil. And at the very end of the book, chapter 3, verses 17 and 18, we hear this. Though the fig tree may not blossom, nor fruit be on the vines, though the labor of the olive may fail, and the fields yield no food, though the flock may be cut off from the fold, and there be no herd in the stalls, a lot of agricultural ways of describing complete devastation of the land, yet I will rejoice in Yahweh. I will joy in the God of my salvation. The point is that in this version of the problem of evil, it's not the general question of how a good and omnipotent God can allow problems. It's how a God who is interested in this nation from the very beginning, how can he love this nation and yet allow such devastation? That's a much more specific problem of evil, as you can tell, than just how can bad things happen to good people. This is a very specific version of that problem, which ends with Habakkuk, the godly man, admitting, my response to this storyline, even though God is using Babylon And it's happening in spite of his intense love for us. I will still follow Yahweh. I will still give him my heart, or as it says, I will rejoice in Yahweh. I will joy in the God of my salvation. Well, the most famous verse actually in Habakkuk is chapter 2, verse 4. And this is a good way to think of how the idea of salvation, again, works through both the Old Testament and the New Testament. Habakkuk 2:4, behold the proud, his soul is not upright in him, but the just, and remember this word, tzaddik, the just shall live by his faith. Now, we have talked, of course, in terms of how individual salvation in the Old Testament is earned in a very simple way, and that is through that word aman, often translated as faith or trust. I have recommended loyalty because just of how the story works. I give my loyalty either to a created God or the creator God, okay? Well, that's a very simple way of saying it. The just, the tzaddik person will live by his aman, or his faith. The story I would have here would be like a Jeremiah who is going to stay in Judea. He's not going to go into captivity. Or a Daniel or an Ezekiel who we know are taken off to Babylon. So let's use these three men as examples of this proverbial way of describing how does a tzaddik person find his salvation in the Old Testament. The tzaddik person will live by his faith. Now, what's tricky about this, it's not a trick, I guess, but what's interesting is the word that is translated as faith in the Old Testament verse there, Habakkuk 2:4, is not aman, it's amunah. Amunah. Notice it's just a vowel difference between aman. And it's better translated, and here's how the Jewish Publication Society puts it, because again they're noticing the word amunah, which is a derivative of aman. Notice how they'll translate it. The righteous man is rewarded for his fidelity. Fidelity. Now, amunah, when you look it up in the Hebrew dictionary, its opening definitions are firmness, stability, permanence. So, again, it just pushes this idea even further. Aman, or the derivative word, the same word with different vowels, amunah, actually is translated as firmness, permanence. Notice that idea of fidelity or loyalty to this God as opposed to any other. That is how then this story in Habakkuk is thinking of people like whether you stay in Judea like a Jeremiah or you go to Babylon. It's not about sacred space. It's not about sacrifice. It's not about atonement practices. It's all about firmness and stability in being loyal to Yahweh. What's very important is that this verse, Habakkuk 2:4, is immediately brought into the New Testament through direct quotation in Romans, Galatians, and Hebrews, three of the most theologically important books of the New Testament. In looking at New Testament salvation and trying to define it, we'll refer back to this moment in Habakkuk 2:4, highlighting the loyalty of someone to Yahweh.